Beneath the sun-scorched earth of Venezuela lies a treasure of almost unimaginable scale. A sea of black gold so vast it redefines the very concept of national wealth. With over 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, this South American nation sits atop the largest petroleum deposits on the entire planet. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than Canada, more than Iran. For decades, this immense resource was not just a geological fact, it was a national destiny, a promise of endless prosperity, a ticket to a first-world future. The towering derricks stretching to the horizon were monuments to a dream, each one pumping liquid potential from the depths of the Orinoco Belt. This was the engine that was supposed to power a continental leader, a beacon of progress in Latin America. Yet on the surface a different story unfolds, a story of profound and catastrophic failure. The promise of prosperity has evaporated into a nightmare of hyperinflation, where money is weighed instead of counted. The dream of a modern nation has crumbled into a landscape of decaying infrastructure, where blackouts are a daily routine and clean water is a luxury. Venezuela's economy, once the envy of its neighbors, is in a state of complete and utter collapse. The nation with the world's largest oil reserves cannot even keep the lights on or its people fed. This is the great Venezuelan paradox, a country drowning in wealth while its people starve. The most devastating consequence of this collapse is not measured in barrels or dollars, but in human lives. Over 7.5 million people, more than 25% of the entire population, have fled the country. It's the largest refugee crisis in the modern history of the Western Hemisphere, dwarfing others in its scale and speed. They are doctors, engineers, teachers, and laborers, a generation of talent and hope, now scattered across the globe. They walk for days, crossing treacherous borders with nothing but the clothes on their backs, driven by a desperate search for safety, a meal, a future for their children. Back home, those who remain face a silent humanitarian crisis. They wait in endless lines for a few gallons of gasoline in a country that should be swimming in it. They search barren grocery shelves for basic staples. They watch loved ones suffer in dilapidated hospitals that lack even the most basic medicines, like antibiotics or pain relief. How did this happen? How did a nation so profoundly blessed with this subterranean treasure find itself so utterly cursed by it? This is the central, haunting question at the heart of Venezuela's tragedy. It's a story of how the intoxicating allure of oil wealth can corrupt a nation's soul, hollow out its institutions, and poison its politics. This documentary will investigate the decades-long journey that transformed Venezuela from one of Latin America's wealthiest and most stable democracies into a fragile, fractured, and deeply authoritarian state. We will trace the path from the boom years of the 1970s, when the country was dubbed Saudi Venezuela, and its capital, Caracas, was a glittering hub of modernity and culture, to the grim reality of today. And if you're watching this from thousands of miles away, you might be tempted to see this as a distant, isolated tragedy. But you should care about what happens next, because the shock waves of Venezuela's implosion are being felt across the globe. First, there is the matter of the global energy market. Venezuela was once a major oil exporter, a reliable supplier of the specific heavy crude that many complex refineries, particularly on the U.S. Gulf Coast, were designed to process. Its dramatic collapse in production, accelerated by crippling international sanctions, has left a void in the market. This instability contributes to price volatility and creates geopolitical openings for other nations, like Russia and Iran, to increase their influence over global energy supplies. The fate of Venezuela's oil is inextricably linked to the price you pay at the pump and the energy security of entire nations. Beyond the oil markets, Venezuela has become a flashpoint for geopolitical competition. Its strategic location in the Caribbean, bordering the Atlantic Ocean, makes its stability a key concern for regional security. As the state has weakened, its vast, lawless territories have become havens for transnational criminal organizations, involved in everything from drug trafficking to illegal gold mining. Furthermore, the government in Caracas has forged deep alliances with U.S. adversaries. Russian military advisors, Chinese loans for oil deals, and Iranian fuel tankers have all become common sights, turning Venezuela into a chessboard for a new kind of great power rivalry, right in America's backyard. The country's political crisis is no longer just a domestic affair, it is an international one, with high-stakes implications for the balance of power in the 21st century. And then there is the staggering human exodus, which has morphed into a regional crisis of unprecedented proportions. Neighboring countries like Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Brazil are straining under the pressure of absorbing millions of desperate people. Social services are overwhelmed, local economies are stressed, and political tensions are rising. The stability of the entire Andean region is being tested by this relentless flow of humanity. The Venezuelan diaspora is reshaping the demographics and politics of South America, and its effects will be felt for generations to come. This is not a problem contained by borders, it is a shared challenge that demands a global response. To truly understand this crisis, we must peel back the layers of propaganda, politics, and pain. In this documentary, we will journey deep into the heart of the Venezuelan story. We will analyze the critical decisions made over half a century, from the nationalization of the oil industry to the rise of Hugo Chávez and the Bolivarian Revolution. We will investigate the web of systemic corruption that allowed a kleptocratic elite to siphon away trillions of dollars in oil revenue, leaving the nation bankrupt. We will hear directly from the architects of the regime and from the political opposition that has fought for years to restore democracy. We will speak with world-renowned economists who foresaw this disaster, with journalists who have risked their lives to report the truth, and most importantly, with the ordinary Venezuelan people, the mechanics, the nurses, the students, the mothers, who are living through the consequences of this catastrophe every single day. The story of Venezuela is more than just a national tragedy. It is a profound and urgent cautionary tale for the modern world. It is a warning about the seductive danger of resource dependency, a phenomenon known as the Dutch disease, where one booming sector suffocates all others. It is a lesson in the fragility of democratic institutions when faced with populist strongmen and unchecked power. And above all, it is a testament to the devastating human cost of failed governance and ideological extremism. To understand where Venezuela is going and what its fate means for the rest of us, we must first understand how it all went so terribly wrong. This is that story. Before the Black Gold, Venezuela was a different world. A sparsely populated agrarian nation, its economy tethered to coffee and cocoa exports. It was a country of stark contrasts where rural poverty stood against the wealth of a small landowning elite, a nation plagued by political instability and ruled by a succession of regional strongmen, or caudillos. Life for the vast majority was a struggle for subsistence, far removed from the currents of global industry. But beneath the soil, a force of unimaginable power lay dormant, waiting to be unleashed. The turning point came on December 14, 1922. Near the shores of Lake Maracaibo, the Barroso II exploration well, drilled by Royal Dutch Shell, erupted. It wasn't just a discovery, it was a cataclysm. A geyser of crude oil, estimated at 100,000 barrels per day, shot 200 feet into the air, roaring uncontrollably for 9 days. This single event put Venezuela on the world map. The devil's excrement, as the indigenous people called it, was about to become the nation's blessing and its curse. Foreign capital from America and Europe flooded in, transforming the sleepy Maracaibo Basin into a bustling hub of derricks, pipelines, and roughneck workers. A new era had begun, not with a whisper, but with a deafening roar. By the late 1920s, Venezuela had become the world's largest oil exporter. The wealth was staggering, and it fundamentally reshaped the state. Visionary intellectuals like Arturo Uslar Pietri warned of the dangers. In 1936, he coined a phrase that would echo through Venezuelan history, sembrar el petroleo, to sow the oil. The idea was simple yet profound: use the finite oil revenues to build a sustainable, diversified economy, investing in agriculture, industry, and education. It was a call to transform the transient wealth from below the ground into lasting prosperity above it. For a time, it seemed to work. The state poured money into massive infrastructure projects. Highways cut through mountains, modern cities rose from the dust, and a burgeoning middle class emerged, enjoying a standard of living that was the envy of Latin America. This golden age reached its zenith in the 1970s. The 1973 OPEC oil embargo sent global prices skyrocketing, and Venezuela, a founding member of OPEC, was awash in petrodollars. This was the era of Saudi Venezuela. The nation's GDP quadrupled. The currency, the bolivar, was so strong it was nicknamed the Fuerte. Venezuelans flocked to Miami for shopping sprees, famously quipping, "Damn does, give me two." The euphoria culminated in 1976 when President Carlos Andrés Pérez nationalized the oil industry, creating the state-owned giant Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. or PDVSA. It was a moment of immense national pride, a declaration of economic sovereignty. Venezuela was now seemingly the master of its own destiny, but the foundations of this prosperity were built on sand. The nation was suffering from a classic case of the Dutch disease. This economic phenomenon describes how a boom in a single natural resource paradoxically weakens all other sectors of the economy. As petrodollars flooded in, Venezuela's currency became overvalued. This made its other exports, like coffee and manufactured goods, too expensive to compete on the global market. Agriculture, once the backbone of the nation, withered. Venezuela went from feeding itself to importing over 70% of its food. The state, flush with cash, became the primary engine of the economy, creating a culture of dependency and clientelism. Your success was determined less by what you produced, and more by who you knew. The dream of sowing the oil had failed. Instead, Venezuela had become a petrostate, utterly and completely addicted to a single commodity. And then, the party ended. The 1980s brought a global oil glut, as new production from the North Sea and Alaska came online, and Western nations improved energy efficiency. Prices cratered. For Venezuela, the reckoning arrived on February 18, 1983, a day seared into the national memory as Viernes Negro, Black Friday. For the first time in decades, the government was forced to devalue the bolivar. The psychological shock was immense. The illusion of perpetual wealth was shattered overnight. The country, which had borrowed heavily against future oil profits, was now drowning in foreign debt. The lost decade had begun. The economic pain translated into social fury. By the end of the decade, the situation was explosive. In February 1989, President Pérez, the very same man who had presided over the 70s boom, announced an IMF-backed austerity package, including a hike in gasoline prices. The response was the Caracazo, a spontaneous uprising of the poor from the barrios surrounding Caracas, who descended on the city in a wave of rioting and looting. It was a primal scream of a population that felt betrayed and abandoned. The government's response was brutal. The military was sent into the streets, and the crackdown left hundreds, perhaps thousands, dead. The Caracazo destroyed the myth of Venezuelan democracy and exposed the deep fractures in its society. Watching these events unfold was a young, charismatic Army lieutenant colonel named Hugo Chávez. Disgusted by the corruption of the political elite and the massacre of civilians, he began plotting. In 1992, he led a failed military coup, but in his televised surrender he captured the nation's attention, famously stating his objectives had not been met. For now, that Pora Hora turned a failed coup leader into a political phenomenon. For a populace desperate for a savior after years of decline, Chávez embodied hope and rebellion. The stage was set, the old order was crumbling, and a new, radical force was about to take power. The story of Venezuela's collapse is inextricably linked to the rise of one man, Hugo Chávez. Tapping into a deep well of public anger against decades of corruption and inequality, the charismatic former paratrooper was elected president in 1998. He promised a Bolivarian revolution, a new dawn for the nation's poor, funded by its greatest treasure, its vast oil reserves. At the heart of his plan was Petróleos de Venezuela, or PDVSA, the state-owned oil and gas giant. For Chávez, PDVSA was a symbol of the old elite and foreign influence. He vowed to seize full control and redirect its immense wealth to the people. The process began in earnest after a contentious oil strike in 2002, an attempt by the company's management to oust him. Chávez's response was swift and decisive. He fired nearly 20,000 of PDVSA's employees, a mass dismissal that gutted the company of its most experienced engineers, geologists, and managers. In their place, he installed over 100,000 political loyalists. With the company now firmly under his command and global oil prices soaring to unprecedented heights, Chávez launched his ambitious social programs, the Misiones Bolivarianas. Billions in oil revenue funded free health clinics staffed by Cuban doctors, literacy campaigns, and subsidized food for the poor. For a time, it seemed the revolution was working. Poverty rates fell, and Chávez's popularity soared among his base. But beneath the surface, the seeds of disaster had been sown. The purge of expertise at PDVSA had catastrophic consequences. The new management, chosen for loyalty over competence, lacked the technical know-how to maintain the complex machinery of the oil industry. critical investments in exploration, maintenance, and infrastructure were neglected. Instead of reinvesting profits to sustain and grow production, the government treated PDVSA as a political piggy bank, draining it to fund social spending and consolidate power. This mismanagement was compounded by staggering levels of corruption. A complex web of currency controls and opaque contracts created a system ripe for graft. Billions of dollars were siphoned off by government officials, military figures, and well-connected insiders, vanishing into offshore accounts while the nation's oil fields began a slow, inexorable decline. For years, record-high oil prices masked the deepening rot. But in 2014, the house of cards came crashing down. A global glut caused oil prices to plummet from over $100 a barrel to below $30. For Venezuela, whose economy was almost entirely dependent on oil exports, the shock was cataclysmic. The government's revenue evaporated overnight. The Dutch disease, where a boom in one sector cripples all others, had left the country with virtually no other industry to fall back on. Agriculture and manufacturing had withered away decades prior, unable to compete with the flood of petrodollars. Faced with a fiscal abyss, the government of Chávez's successor, Nicolas Maduro, resorted to the only tool it had left: printing money. The result was an economic death spiral. Inflation exploded, morphing into one of the worst episodes of hyperinflation in modern history. At its peak in 2018, prices were doubling every few weeks, with the annual inflation rate soaring past 1,000,000%. The currency, the bolivar, became effectively worthless. Citizens needed backpacks stuffed with cash just to buy groceries. Life savings were wiped out in a matter of days. The price controls meant to keep goods affordable backfired spectacularly, leading to chronic, crippling shortages of everything: food, medicine, toilet paper, car parts. The images became a symbol of national collapse: endless lines for a loaf of bread, empty pharmacy shelves, and desperate people scavenging for food in the trash. As the economic and humanitarian crisis deepened, so did the political one. The Maduro government grew increasingly authoritarian, cracking down on dissent and holding elections widely condemned as fraudulent. In response, the United States and other nations imposed a series of escalating sanctions. Initially targeting high-ranking officials, the measures eventually hit Venezuela's financial sector and, crucially, its already crippled oil industry. The sanctions became a focal point of debate. The government blamed them as the sole cause of the country's suffering, an act of economic warfare. Critics argued they were a necessary response to dictatorship, targeting the regime's finances. The undeniable reality is that they severely tightened the economic vice, cutting off the country from international credit and making it nearly impossible to import necessary goods, further intensifying the suffering of the Venezuelan people. Faced with hunger, disease, and a complete breakdown of society, they began to flee. It became one of the largest migration crises in the world. Millions of Venezuelans, doctors, teachers, laborers, entire families, left everything behind, undertaking perilous journeys on foot across mountains and borders, seeking refuge in neighboring countries. Today, Venezuela is a shadow of its former self. PDVSA's production has collapsed to levels not seen since the 1940s. Its refineries are rusting husks, its pipelines leak, and its oil fields lie dormant. The nation sits atop the world's largest proven oil reserves, yet it is unable to profit from them. As the global community accelerates its transition towards renewable energy, Venezuela's predicament becomes even more precarious. Its heavy, sulfurous crude is expensive to extract and refine, making it less competitive in a world that increasingly values cleaner, cheaper energy sources. Rebuilding the industry would require tens of billions of dollars in investment and a level of political stability that remains a distant dream. The nation is trapped between the ghost of its oil-rich past and an uncertain post-petroleum future, a stark and tragic testament to the profound dangers of the resource curse.